and welcome to the penultimate podcast of the history of chocolate. This is Unit 11, The Ethics of Chocolate and Globalization. In this podcast, we'll begin our two-part discussion on the modern chocolate industry. These last two units of the course are accompanied by a fair bit of other audio-visual material, including a full-length feature documentary about chocolate slavery and several other videos and podcasts. As a result, Unit 11 and Unit 12 podcasts are a little shorter than usual. The learning outcomes for this unit are: number 1, define the term globalization and how this relates to chocolate production. Describe the economics of cacao farming and how this can lead to exploitation of workers and children. Recognize how global demand drives these economic realities. And finally, describe the ethical chocolate movement and how it is attempting to improve the lives of workers. As we introduced in the last podcast, the $83 billion modern chocolate industry of chocolate has become a symbol of westernization. However, from an economic standpoint, chocolate is also a globalized product. Globalization links consumers to producers in a complex web of economic relationships, sometimes equal, but more often not. In this podcast, we'll explore how the modern chocolate industry produces exploitation among poorer countries that produce cacao. Globalization and chocolate. Globalization arises from the increasing integration of world economies, ideas, and products. Everyone in the world is more connected than ever before. Take a look in the room around you. Think of all the products that you have. How many of them were made in this country? Local economies must now integrate on a global scale. This interconnectedness is a relatively new phenomenon. Globalization has increased due to the reduction of trade barriers over the past decades. Now, naturally, the economics of chocolate are also influenced by globalization. Not only is chocolate a large industry worth billions, but we are also witnessing changing patterns of consumption as non-Western consumers increasingly enjoy chocolate too. As always, in a globally competitive environment, there is constant demand for the lowest cost possible. Although the cacao tree originated in Mesoamerica, most of the world's supply of cacao today comes from Africa, and more specifically the Ivory Coast. However, the increasing worldwide demand, along with a pressure to keep overall prices low, has meant that most cacao farmers are very poor. Commonly, many thousands of small-scale farmers sell to larger distributors, who in turn sell their product to the big chocolate conglomerates such as Hershey's or Nestle. The size and complexity of this system has meant that there are very few checks and balances to ensure that the chocolate was produced ethically. Since the late 1990s, several investigations by NGOs and journalists have revealed that child slavery has become commonplace in the chocolate industry. You'll watch one documentary during this unit which explores this problem in great depth. The demand for low-cost chocolate has meant that children are trafficked from poorer countries such as Mali to cacao farms in the Ivory Coast and Ghana. When these investigations first came to light almost 2 decades ago, there were numerous promises to work to end the practice by the big chocolate corporations. However, evidence has recently suggested that little has changed. A recent report, for example, suggested that child labor has increased by 46% in the Ivory Coast between 2009 and 2014. Not all of these children are slaves, but many are. More recently, there has been a consumer movement towards sustainable and ethical chocolate, and some companies have adapted to meet these demands. One current example is the company Green and Black. The ethical chocolate movement has modeled itself on the success of other fair trade initiatives in other industries such as coffee. The central tenet of ethical chocolate proposes a fair wage for cacao farmers and the prohibition of child slavery. Thus, the chocolate produced would abide by international conventions on human rights and labor. Naturally, this would make for a more expensive chocolate, but Western consumers may be willing to pay the price. It remains to be seen how successful these initiatives will be.